Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the deadliest, most landscape altering conventional wars of the 20th century. Now, as students of Middle Eastern history, you already know the region is complex, right? But the sheer scale of the Iran Iraq War, it completely reshaped the map. We're looking at a conflict that dragged in global superpowers, introduced horrific new combat theaters, and essentially bankrupted two nations, all while leaving this huge indelible mark on the geopolitical landscape. So I want you to ask yourself a question right now. What actually happens when a trillion-dollar war, one that drags on for nearly 8 years, ends exactly where it started? It's the central tragic irony of the whole conflict. And honestly, it's what hooks you in when you really study this era. All that destruction, all that sacrifice, and no way, the borders stayed practically identical to the day the first shots were fired. To really grasp the modern Middle East, we have to figure out why this massive explosion of violence happened in the first place and why it ended in such a devastating stalemate. Now, we can't just look at the 1980 invasion in a vacuum. It doesn't work that way. The geopolitical connective tissue here traces way back to long-running border disputes over the Shatt el-Arab River. Think back to 1937. There was a treaty signed over navigation tolls, which Iran actually broke later on in 1969. This tension kept building until the 1975 Algiers Agreement, where Iraq officially ceded the eastern bank of the river to Iran. But the real spark, the match in the powder keg, that was the 1979 Iranian Revolution. Overthrowing the Shah completely upended the regional balance of power, paving the way directly for the Iraqi invasion in September 1980. Section 1. The Roots of Conflict. To really get this, we need to look at the two men at the center. On one side, you've got Saddam Hussein. He was fiercely driven by Arab nationalism, wanting to push Egypt aside as the leader of the Arab world. Plus, he wanted absolute hegemony over the Persian Gulf and, of course, to reclaim the Shatt al-Arab. On the flip side, you have Ruhollah Khomeini. He's leading a brand new theocratic state armed with a revolutionary pan-Islamic ideology. Khomeini's explicit goal? Export the Shia Islamic Revolution. He openly called monarchies illegitimate and actively pushed for the overthrow of the Ba'athist government in Iraq. Basically, it was a perfect storm of competing regional ambitions. Section 2, the Iraqi invasion stalls. Okay, so September 1980 hits and Iraqi forces push across the border. They are fully expecting a rapid, totally decisive victory. Saddam Hussein looked next door and basically saw a fractured, internationally isolated Iran, crippled by post-revolution chaos, military purges, and sanctions. He figured the military would just fold. But they didn't. Instead, the Iranian forces, backed by a deeply motivated civilian population, proved to be unbelievably resilient. They took that initial shock and held their ground. By December 1980, literally just months into the conflict, the Iraqi advance had completely bogged down. Why? Modern anti-tank weapons were so lethal that Iraq's armored maneuverability was completely neutralized. They had to entrench their tanks into static, fixed positions. So this rapid invasion abruptly devolved into incredibly costly, grueling trench warfare. Both sides were locked in on the defensive, just trading artillery fire across a completely stagnant front line. Section 3. Iran pushes back. Fast forward to the spring of 1982. Iran flips the script and launches Operation Beit ul-Maqdis. They rolled out these massive surprise counteroffensives, relying heavily on human wave attacks by the volunteer Basij militia. We're talking overwhelming, intensely motivated infantry charges, immediately followed up by regular army and Revolutionary Guard support. The tactic completely shocked the Iraqi forces. It worked so well that Iran drove them right out of the Khuzestan region, forced them to retreat back to the pre-war border, and captured thousands of Iraqi troops along the way. And then comes what historians often debate as the most fateful decision of the entire war. Having successfully pushed Iraq back to the original border, Iran had a choice to make. Do they accept a ceasefire, which actually some Iranian leaders were totally in favor of, or do they press the advantage? Ultimately, a hardline faction of clerics won that internal debate. They made the call to cross the border, invade Iraq, and try to topple Saddam's government entirely. Section 4. Stalemate and Total War. During these really grim middle years, Iraq adopted a tactical shift called defense in depth to handle Iran's massive human wave attacks. Instead of trying to hold a super rigid front line, Iraq would actually let the Iranian infantry overrun their forward trenches. It sounds crazy, but it intentionally channeled the Iranians into these predetermined traps and pockets. Once there, Iraqi air and artillery would pin them down, setting the stage for crushing counterattacks by Iraqi mechanized infantry and tanks. It was a brutal strategy specifically designed to bleed the enemy dry. Now, consider the sheer scale of the hardware here. Thanks to foreign loans, Iraq was able to massively expand its military arsenal. Meanwhile, Iran was internationally isolated and really struggled to replace its aging, mostly pre-revolution American equipment. Just look at the devastating imbalance in air superiority. By 1987, Iraq boasted over 500 fighter aircraft. Iran? They plummeted to a mere 65 serviceable jets. Iraq was outgunning Iran on a truly massive scale. Because the ground war became this hopeless, grinding stalemate, both sides started escalating into entirely new, devastating theaters of conflict. You've got the tanker war, where both sides started attacking neutral and enemy oil shipping in the Persian Gulf just to cripple each other's economies. Then there was the War of the Cities, indiscriminate air and missile raids on civilian populations, terrorizing places like Tehran and Baghdad. And finally, the Northern Front, where Iran teamed up with Kurdish Peshmerga insurgents to infiltrate northern Iraq. It really became a total war. We also have to gravely note a particularly horrific escalation here: Iraq's systemic use of chemical weapons. This was confirmed by reports from the UN Secretary General. Iraq frequently used mustard gas and nerve agents to create literal chemical walls against Iranian offensives. Tragically, they deployed these weapons against both Iranian troops and civilian populations who lacked any sort of protection. It was an absolutely brutal tactic and a grueling war of attrition. Section 5. A devastating aftermath. Finally, by August 1988, after years of unbelievable military and economic losses, cratering morale, and a shifting international landscape, both exhausted nations accepted a ceasefire under United Nations Security Council Resolution 598. They left behind a staggering estimated death toll of over 500,000 military personnel and civilians. That makes it the deadliest conventional war fought between regular armies of developing countries. Some estimates even put combined casualties closer to 1 million. Entire generations of young men were lost to the trenches and marshes. And the economic cost? Try wrapping your head around an estimated $1.2 trillion in combined economic loss. Both nations were essentially bankrupt. Iraq accrued massive international debt, which, as we know, would go right on to fuel further regional instability, like their invasion of Kuwait just a couple of years later. The economic development of both countries was pushed back by decades. But honestly, perhaps the most staggering figure of the entire war is this: 0. After 8 years of total war, human wave attacks, chemical weapons, and ballistic missiles raining down on major cities, there were 0 permanent territorial changes. Neither country gained a single inch of ground. It was a complete return to the exact borders set by the 1975 Algiers Agreement. So we come back to it. If $1 trillion and over 500,000 lives bought absolutely nothing but the status quo, how did this invisible scar dictate the next 40 years of Middle Eastern history? The physical borders didn't change, but the psychology, the sectarian divisions, and the strategic paranoia of the entire region, those were permanently rewritten. It's a massive shift to keep in mind as you continue studying the modern dynamics of the Gulf. Keep digging into your sources, and as always, keep questioning the history.